In today's event, we will witness the culmination of their efforts, perseverance, and dedication in their quest of honing and discovering their skills. We will witness the fruit of their labors in pursuit of their dreams. Ladies and gents, the first ever virtual graduation and commencement exercises of San Guillermo Vocational and Industrial High School. Our event's hosts, Mrs. Jane F. Tagulao, Junior High School Teacher, and Mr. Abraham S. Tudillo, Senior High School Teacher.
Welcome and a pleasant day, everyone.
It's my honor to welcome you to our very first virtual completion and graduation rites with the theme Strengthening Quality Education Amid COVID-19 Pandemic.
Amidst the global pandemic we are in, San Guillermo Vocational and Industrial High School upholds its desires to acknowledge our best students for the school year 2020-2021.
This virtual gathering inspires us to celebrate our learners' hard work and accomplishments.
Indeed, along with our awardees family, faculty and staff, take pride in the new milestone in our students' lives. Please maintain your attention for the singing of the Philippine National Anthem, Mrs. Ara C. Longat, Junior High School Teacher, conducting.
Mga kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas.
May we remember the source of our wisdom, strength, and blessings. Let us prepare our souls for the prayer to be led by Ma'am Leslie R. Oliva, Junior High School Science Teacher, followed by the singing of Isabella Kim.
Almighty God, our Creator, we praise in you. We humbly come before you today to ask for your presence and guidance as we celebrate the moving ceremony and graduation of Batch 2020-2021. Let the stars of today, the completers and the graduates, value more education, for this is not the end, but the beginning of a new journey towards schooling. God, let them follow their good dreams and bring them into reality, and to always remember the sacrifices of their parents, guardians, family, loved ones, and make us an inspiration to push through. And for the parents, God, continue to give them patience as they were handed with responsibilities along this time. Touch their heart and let it always be to support their child towards their chosen goal. And lastly, for the teachers, Almighty Father, continue to grant us more courage and wisdom for us to continually bind and unite with parents and stakeholders to help these learners. And let our love for them be their light to continue to move forward amidst this pandemic. Above all, thank you for all the blessings that we receive, and forgive us all for our sins and shortcomings. This we ask through your Son, Jesus. Amen.
Isabella, a home endeared by man, upright and free, a land for freedom and for truth. Her shining rivers teem with fish and mountains lush with trees. Her fertile fields abound with yield our blessings for our meat. Bless Isabella, gracious Lord, and keep her in your fold. In unison we all proclaim her providential fame. Bless Isabella, gracious Lord, and keep her in your fold. In unison we all proclaim her providential fame.
At this juncture, let's welcome Dr. Annabel C. Guillermo, a master teacher, with our joyful virtual applause for the giving of the opening remarks.
Let me convey my greetings to our most esteemed leaders in the Department of Education, to our dear parents, to our supportive local government unit and barangay officials, our dear students, and fellow servants in the government, good morning. Today is a great day. It's a day to celebrate with your families and friends. A day you've been waiting for. No more modules and learning activity sheets to read and answer. Engulfed with a life-threatening as spiked by COVID-19, I commend the cooperation of everyone in making learning still possible for the whole cycle of school year 2020-2021. Bounded on limited movement due to our strict adherence to the existing health protocols, we admit that our earnest desire to deliver education the best we can was limited too. After laying our basic education learning continuity plan, or the BCLP, prior to the opening of school year 2020-2021, it surfaced that the printed self-learning modules, or the SLM, best fits the capability of our learners and consider this to be the most appropriate learning delivery mode, or LDM, in our locality, of which we have chosen and maximized just to make sure that our students in San Guillermo Vocational and Industrial High School, with the guidance and support of their own parents or guardians, will traverse the challenging scheme of learning, which is beyond the boundary of our usual face-to-face scheme in teaching-learning process. Now that we are to end the school year, let us open an ample time in our minds and hearts to find a way to be thankful despite the fragments of inconveniences that we experienced during our one whole school year struggle in the field of education. Among the most important individuals whom are truly grateful are our parents and local officials who relentlessly supported us and stood at our side not only by way of transporting and delivering the modules of our learners, but most importantly, their sacrifices in assuming and playing our role as teacher to their children. Yes, we, the teachers and staff of San Guillermo Vocational and Industrial High School, are truly grateful for the outpouring support you have invested to our learners during these challenging times. My fondest challenge to our learners, most especially to the completers and graduates, is you must continue yearning for education. A yearning that will push you to spark encouragement to strive harder even when the door of possibility seems to shatter and even your going gets rough and tough. On this day onward, let us continue to be optimistic and help each other to the best we can so that the possibilities will always happen, and never forget to be thankful to our God Almighty because He is always good all the time. To all of you, most especially to the completers and graduates, and of course their parents, congratulations. Thank you and God bless us all.
Let's welcome with virtual applause Honorable Marcelina L. Caballero, Sangguniang Bayan member and the General Parent Teacher Association President for the welcome address.
To our dear Principal, Madam Gina Magdalena, to our teachers, parents, completers, a blessed good morning. Today is your special day. Everybody is excited, first, the parents and the completers. Dahil nasa mga ating graduate, pagtatapos ngayon, it means you finish the first and second step of your education. Now, you are in your third and final step to fulfill your dreams. Our theme, kalidad ng edukasyon, lalong patadahin sa gitna ng pandemya. Completers, learners, walang rason para tayo ay tumigil sa pag-aaral. Kahit nasa pandemya tayo, we have two ways of learning. One is by modules, second is via Zoom, or what we call online classes. So almost 1 year old, more than 11 months, here you are, marching, and left. Via virtual pala. Kakaiba talaga ng ating graduation day. But at least, you are very proud of yourself. Dahil natapos ninyo ang buong taon in spite of many challenges along the way. I know you do your best, learners and completers, to finish the race and start another higher step to reach your dreams to become someday perhaps a doctor, a dentist, a teacher, at marami pang iba. Learners, completers, just focus to your goal or dreams. Study hard more. Dream big. But it must be achievable dream. Meaning, do not just dream. Take a step or actions to achieve it. To our dear teachers, thank you. Thank you. You are the reason why our learners or completers are here today. You mold them. Give them the education they needed. You help them to reach their goal or dreams. Thank you, dear teachers. Parents, keep on supporting our kids sa kanilang pag-aaral. Again, to everyone, welcome to our first virtual graduation and moving up ceremony. God bless everyone.
Let's listen to the message of our very brilliant district supervisor, Dr. Wilson A. Sitkin.
A pleasant day to everyone, especially to our dear graduates. At the start of the school year, most of you and even a few of us in the academy had doubted for the successful implementation to the non-face-to-face modes of teaching that the department had designed due to the crisis we have been experiencing. But look to where we are now. We've reached this finish line. Many challenges and obstacles that were seemed insurmountable were piled along the way, but still we reached the top. These were all due to our unified efforts and full support to our department in translating its commitment to ensure the continuity of education amid this pandemic. Education experts had introduced different learning modalities for the students for them to better understand the concepts and master the skills required for every specific competency. And I am very much delighted that most of them had shown very satisfying test results and performances. Added to this, they manifested independence and responsibility as they patiently and diligently finished the tasks assigned to them. This year's theme is strengthening the quality of education amid COVID-19 pandemic, recognizes our unity in battling with the challenges posed by this crisis. We were able to fortify the delivery of quality education because each of us had wholeheartedly did his share in achieving our target goal. The contribution of everyone, either big or small, had paved the way in making education accessible to all learners, in spite of the difficult situation in delivery and retrieval of modules. Such unselfish acts are what we need in order to continue providing the best service to our learners. We don't know when will our sector back to the old normal way of education. But for the meantime, let us all join hands and keep on supporting each other to make education serves as light and guide to our learners in these darkest hours of our lives. To our dear graduates, I give my profound congratulations. You were able to surpass the rigors of this new normal way of learning. Indeed, you are victors. Though your graduation is quite different, that is, you will not march on the hallway to receive your certificates as well as your ribbons and medals. Don't be dismayed, for you have proven your competence and have become more strong and resilient individuals. Ipinakita ninyo ang inyong galing at determinasyon na kaya ninyong mag-aral na kahit wala ang teacher sa inyong tabi, kahit wala kayong classmates at hindi sa paaralan kayo nag-aral. Kayo ang batch na sa aking palagay ay magiging matagumpay sa hinaharap sapagkat kayo ay pinanday na maging matatag. Kaya muli binabati ko kayo. And to all of us, let's celebrate, for we have succeeded. We emerged triumphant and we've proven that we can surpass all challenges as long as we remain united and committed. Congratulations and God bless us all.
Keeping in mind that San Guillermo Vocational and Industrial High School is where excellence grows holistically with persevering character to aspire and to inspire. Let us now proceed to the presentation and acceptance of the candidates for completion and graduation. Let us have our school head, Madam Gina R. Magbaleta, and our Schools Division Superintendent, Dr. Madeline L. Macalig, SESO 6, respectively.
Good morning! I have the honor to present to you the 82 male and 61 female for a total of 143 candidates for graduation and 125 completers for school year 2020 2021 who had satisfactorily completed the requirements mandated by the strengthened Technical Vocational Education Program of the Department of Education, MADA.
By virtue of the power vested in me as the OIC Schools Division Superintendent of the Division of Isabela, and after having been certified by your principal that you have satisfactorily completed the requirements prescribed by the Department of Education under the K-12 Basic Education Program, I now accept and confirm you graduates of school year 2020-2021. Congratulations to all of you!
Sa SGVIHS, skills at talino sigurado. This is the goal of molding the learners for the 21st century skills. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now presenting to you the completers, graduates, and the academic awardees of Batch 2021.
Grade 10 Aguinaldo completers. Elena S. Castañeda, Class Advisor.
Bea Julia B. Cayeta with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ronnie Cayeta.
Adelpha E. Garcia with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. William Garcia.
Almira L. Paderon with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Albert Paderon.
John Cesar R. Rodolfo with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Dominador Rodolfo.
Daniel J. B. Berinya. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Armando Berinya.
Jonathan G. Del Rosario. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Hilario Del Rosario.
Rodel B. Del Rosario. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Florendo Del Rosario.
Christian J. N. Domingo. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Dionisio Domingo.
Marlon L. Dumapay Jr. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Marlon Dumapay Sr.
Mark Darren Ray S. Esposo. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Efren Esposo.
Noe G. Kencha. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Artemio Kencha.
Rostom G. Martinez. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Joey Martinez.
MJ B. Paraino. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Carlito Paraino.
Angelo C. Santos. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Aquilino Santos.
Earl David E. Servan. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Oscar Servan.
Alexandra S. Andasan. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Alejo Andasan Jr.
Melanie D. Arcebal. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Marciano Arcebal.
Alexa Joy E. Baldos. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Anastasio Baldos.
Crystalline Ann G. Castelo. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Winwright Castelo.
Quincy May Joy M. Chu. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Valentino Chu.
Romelyn R. Cruz. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Romeo Cruz.
Alelea S. Domingo. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Richie D. Domingo.
Sheding M. Eligores. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Benjamin G. Eligores.
Yazema M. Eusebio. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Manuel B. Eusebio.
Danica C. Fernandez. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Danilo O. Fernandez.
Kim Kyla C. Gonzalez. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Arnel M. Gonzalez.
Alin May S. Magno. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Reynan F. Magno.
Fraulein Joy V. Notarte. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Rolando V. Notarte.
Christine Lynn P. Pasqua. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Oscar D. Pasqua.
Eliza M. Peralta. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. JJ J. Peralta.
Micaela Santiago. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Christopher M. Santiago.
Crystal Ann M. Ulep. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Arnel V. Ulep. Grade 10 Bonifacio completers. Tenny Joy B. Pasqua, Class Advisor.
Michelle Ann R. Bernardino with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Delio Bernardino.
Maricel M. Cacho with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Franklin Cacho.
Irene Joyce A. Espiritu with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Rodolfo Espiritu.
Marchie May B. Ferrer with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Silverio Ferrer Jr.
Chris Jasper S. Aprecio. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Christopher Aprecio.
Ejulon S. Aquino. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Robert Aquino.
Jefferson S. Bagay. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Pio Bagay.
Jeffrey S. Dacucos. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. James Dacucos.
Daniel D. Espiritu. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Nardito Espiritu.
Rog Michael B. Ferrer. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Condrado Ferrer.
David D. Giyang. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Danilo Giyang.
Christian D. Luno. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Rodel Luno.
Mike A. Orani. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Diosdado Orani.
Edison George G. Prudenciano. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jefferson Prudenciano.
Isabelo J. Tutaan. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Benjamin Tutaan.
John Mark E. Valdez. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Florentino Valdez.
Aaron M. Valenton. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Honorio Valenton.
Arturo R. Verzola. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Saturnino Verzola.
Mary Ann G. Calicdan. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ernesto Calicdan.
Cristela Q. Casio. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Domingo Casio.
Hyacinth Iona S. Caime. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Marcelo Caime.
Sherry May C. De Jesus. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Eddie Boy De Jesus.
Kira M. Dingkug. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Florentino Dingkug.
Angeline A. Fernando. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Federico Fernando.
Christine Jane S. Garcia. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Christopher Garcia.
Diane B. Helardo. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Danilo Helardo.
Shirley C. Manawis. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Cornelio Manawis.
Lindsay R. Mendoza. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Roldan Mendoza.
Simverly A. Pasqua. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Reynaldo Pasqua.
Elaine P. Rillion. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Eddie Rillion.
Princess J. Valenzuela. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Bernard Valenzuela.
Grade 10 Mabini Completers. Josie Quezada Balizi, Class Advisor.
Queenie Ferrer del Rosario. With honors, parents, Mr. and Mrs. Dominador A. del Rosario.
Patrick Arga Agustin. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jesus D. Agustin.
Darwin Agpalsa Alba. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Danilo A. Alba.
John Lloyd Pedro Bustillo. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Dominador Bustillo.
Jerry Mamaklay Corpus. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. James T. Corpus.
Alexander Magbudhi Costudio. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Leonardo B. Costudio.
Froilan Umali Delizo. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Noel O. Delizo.
John Carlo Eugenio Fajardo. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Sunny A. Fajardo.
Herald J. Mangmangon Ferrer. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. June M. Ferrer.
Bernardo Napole Paraino Jr. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Bernardo A. Paraino.
Vincent Gadiano Peñaranda. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Victor Peñaranda.
Irvin Jan Datwin Prudencio. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Erwin Prudencio.
Lawrence Sumawang Sanidad. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Victor A. Sanidad.
Dave Noel Gamundoy Valdez. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Manuel N. Valdez Jr.
Antoinette Asis Baddong. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Fortunato R. Baddong.
Mary Joy Estefanio Bautista. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jonathan M. Bautista.
Edlin May Torres Cantor. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Eduardo S. Cantor.
Rosemary Acob Castillo. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Junior C. Castillo.
Ferlin Paraino Fernandez. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ramon M. Fernandez.
Nova Jane Santiago Ferrer. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Christopher M. Ferrer.
Daphne May Parayo La Chica. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Donald U. La Chica.
Queenslet May Partido La Chica. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jordan O. La Chica.
Valerie May Castelo Libatique. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Alfredo C. Libatique.
Annie Rose Salvador Miguel. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Joel C. Miguel.
Kathleen Masangkay Nasino. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Redento D. Nasino.
Yasmin Hazel Tomas Obidoza. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Victorio V. Obidoza.
Jocelyn Ann Dulay Ragay. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jason B. Ragay.
Renalyn Pascua Returco. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Bernardo C. Returco.
Rufa May Bautista Tabilangon. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Dominador B. Tabilangon.
Grade 10 Rizal Completers. Melina M. Ramos, Class Advisor.
Patrice Marie C. Apostol with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Albert B. Apostol Jr.
Crystal Faith Joy S. Eugenio with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Joey T. Eugenio.
Daryl P. Gomez with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Reynaldo A. Gomez.
Lander C. Bautista. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Cariño R. Bautista.
Armando C. Cabrera Jr. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Armando S. Cabrera Sr.
Jimuel C. Constantino. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Cesar Constantino.
Mark Joel C. De La Peña. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jerry M. De La Peña.
Joseph A. Lopez. Parent, Mrs. Ana A. Lopez.
Limuel M. Mazon. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Wilson M. Mazon.
Philip Angelo S. Nonan. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Pedro S. Nonan.
Nixon P. Ostari. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Nicanor D. Ostari.
Raymark S. Returco. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Reynaldo C. Returco.
Alex P. Rodolfo. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Aurelio S. Rodolfo.
Sherlyn B. Kalikdan. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Arnel Kalikdan.
Jayan Princess D. Kaina. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jean D. Kaina.
Raya Hali G. Costudio. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Josue Costudio.
Sharon M. De La Cruz. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ronald B. De La Cruz.
Rosemary Joy B. Dulatre. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Romeo Dulatre.
Cindy M. Dumawul. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Lupito M. Dumawul.
Revelyn Ann B. Esteban. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Vincent V. Esteban.
Rochelle C. Ganaden. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Rogelio M. Ganaden.
Sian Jane B. Hangdaan. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Dulnoan G. Hangdaan.
Cherry Ann B. Manuel. Parent, Mrs. Lorisa B. Manuel.
Jacqueline P. Miguel. Parent, Mrs. Judith Miguel.
Melody C. Saltat. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Rudy Saltat.
Jaira R. Sarmiento. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Rani C. Sarmiento.
Jasmine Rose P. Sergio. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Joey D. Sergio.
May we listen to the words of gratitude of Patrice Marie C. Apostol, a junior high school completer awardee.
I would like to begin by acknowledging our honorable guest speaker, Mr. Ronald S. Guyud II, for imparting his wisdom for today's event. Our school principal, Madam Gina R. Magbaleta, who is always mentoring us in our academic academic capabilities and extracurricular activities. Our faculty and staff who instill and mold us to be successful in life and who I have witnessed resilience and diligence amidst these out of the ordinary times, our parents, families, and loved ones, especially to my Papa Albert and Mama Perdita. Thank you for always cheering us and giving us guidance to go through with this new normal. To my classmates, to each of you, I couldn't be more thankful for the opportunities you have given me. Also, thank you to my little sister Alfea and Precious Anne, especially to my cousin Erna May, who never fails to support me in doing outputs. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the completers of 2021, thank you for being our support for us to build a strong foundation to begin a new normal way of learning and continue it with strength and ease. Furthermore, to my fellow completers, congratulations! We have finally reached the culmination of our journey. The past few months have been certainly tough, unexplainable, and unforgiving. But if there is a thing I can take with me, it is to love others without judgment, as how I love and treat myself. We were in lockdown. Lockdown from the social events and work. Lockdown from what could have been boundless opportunities. Lockdown and can go to school, which means I cannot see my friends. We miss to wear our uniforms. We miss all the opportunities that our school could offer to develop our whole being. We miss almost everything, and I could say we miss half of our junior years. But this lockdown taught me to be more persevering and independent, who believe that I can do it if only I put my passion on it. In my experience, modular learning is hard. To finish my modules, I need to sleep late at night, wake up early, and sometimes skip meals just to finish my modules on time. But still, there are times that I cry because I don't understand and I can't make it. I even disappoint myself, but then I also realized that through disappointment, you can gain clarity, and with clarity comes conviction and true originality. Work hard, be kind to yourself and others, and amazing things will happen. Despite all of this, I found this journey has been incredibly freeing. I'd like to think that this past year was an opportunity for all of us to realize what is truly important. Spend hours on the phone asking my friends if the module class had started. We call it as a blessing. Class discussion and project became frequent accord interactions. In the end, COVID-19 became a historical moment in the year now. We will probably be remembered as a generation, the graduates during the COVID-19 pandemic. We are known in the whole world as the peculiar class of 2021. We see the future. We will achieve success. Take care, everyone, and good luck.
According to Joshua J. Marin, challenges are what make life interesting, and overcoming them is what makes life meaningful. Ladies and gentlemen, to introduce to us our guest of honor and the speaker on today's affair, may we call on the ever vibrant and full of enthusiasm, Ma'am Jonalyn Barrera Sarmiento, a junior high school mathematics teacher.
A blessed and fruitful morning to everyone. Throughout the years, our school has never failed to produce graduates of brilliance and excellence. One of those was born on April 8, 1999, who is the youngest child of Mr. Ronald Nilo Guyud and Mrs. Marilyn Sarmiento Guyud. He graduated as salutatorian of the batch 2014-2015 of San Guillermo Vocational and Industrial High School, the last batch taking up basic education curriculum. He graduated Bachelor of Science in Pharmacy at St. Mary's University, Bayombong, Nueva Vizcaya in June 2019 as academic scholar with Academic Distinction Pharmacy Department awardee. Just recently, he passed the licensure examination in pharmacy in just a hit. We are proud to say that he is the first ever licensed pharmacist of our school. He was guided with the sayings, "You have to see failure as the beginning and the middle, but never entertain it as an end," by Robert Downey Jr. Ladies and gentlemen, let's all welcome our guest speaker for today's event, Sir Ronald Sarmiento Guyud II.
Good day to everyone. Before I begin my talk, I would like to thank Ma'am Gina R. Magbaleta, the OIC of San Guillermo Vocational and Industrial High School, for her hospitality and for giving me the chance to be your guest speaker for today's memorable event, the first virtual commencement rites. I also want to thank all the faculty and staffs of SGVIHS for supporting wholeheartedly the conduct of this event, despite the health crisis we're facing. The parents supported their children financially, emotionally, and mentally. It is an honor and great privilege to be your guest speaker for today's memorable event. The theme, Strengthening Quality Education Amid Pandemic. This is my first time to be invited as a guest speaker, just right after passing the board exam last month amidst COVID-19 pandemic. And I am hopeful that I will make the best out of it. To tell you a story, in 2015, I graduated from San Guillermo Vocational and Industrial High School as the class salutatorian. When I finished high school, I was still undecided on what course to take in college. I tried to enroll in Philippine Normal University, North Luzon campus in Alicia because I passed their qualifying exam. But I did not end up studying there. Inalok ako ng kuya ko na mag-enroll sa St. Mary's University. At dahil undecided pa rin ako at di magaling sa numbers, sa health-related course ako pumasok. Without thinking, BS Pharmacy yung kinuha kong course. During my college days, I was an academic scholar until I graduated. And I owe it to our alma mater and to our teachers who helped me nurture and develop my talents. Dear teachers, once again, I would like to thank you for giving me and the graduates the foundations. Mabuhay po kayo! In 2020, as I prepared to take the pharmacist licensure examinations, a month before the exam, COVID-19 came to Philippines, which caused lockdowns and even canceled examinations. Yung drive ko na mag-review at mag-aral at mag-exam, nawala. Napaisip ako noon na magtrabaho na lang ako, wag na mag-exam. Ang ending, hindi rin ako nakapagtrabaho sa Baguio kasi pinauwi ako sa amin at dahil na rin sa takot na baka mahawa sa COVID-19. Pagka-uwi at pagkatapos kong mag-quarantine, I was hired as a private tutor for 3 months. Dito ko napagtanto na mahirap mag-aral pag wala ang gabay ng isang guro, which was taken for granted during pre-pandemic. As after a series of rescheduled examinations on June 29 to 30, 2021, finally, tuloy na ang exam. I'm glad I mustered up the courage to take the board exam. After kong mag-exam, bago ako malis ng examination room, kinausap ko si Lord at sabi sa kanya, "Lord, ginawa ko po yung best ko. Kayo na pong bahala sa pagkukulang ko." Habang hinihintay yung results, wala akong ibang ginawa kundi magdasal na magdasal na magdasal. A week after the boards, may resulta na. At habang nag-scroll ako sa roll of passers, nakita ko yung mga pangalan ng aking mga kaklase. At masaya ako dun, kasi nga marami kaming pumasa. At di nagtagal, nakita ko yung pangalan ko, number 700 pa nga sa listahan. Answered prayer. Thank you, Lord. Sobrang tuwa ko, wala na akong ibang ginawa kundi magpasalamat sa Kanya. In relation to your situation during your school days, some of you might have thought, tigil na muna ako, wala namang face-to-face. Hirap naman, panay module, ang kakapal na module, walang turo. Boring mag-aral pag walang face-to-face, ang bagal ng net. At nakaka-stress, gusto ko na lang maging halaman at marami pang ibang rants ng estudyante. This situation taught us to be grateful of what we have, especially sa ating mga guro, na nandyan para gabayan tayo sa pag-aaral during pre-pandemic. Na na-realize natin ngayon kung gaano sila kaimportante sa ating pag-aaral. The situation taught us to be resilient when things get rough, to be flexible in using resources that's already in front of you, and to rise through challenges brought by the pandemic. I found that nothing in life is worthwhile unless you take risk. Nelson Mandela once said, "There is no passion to be found in playing small and settling for a life that's less than the one you are capable of living." In short, don't settle for less and maximize your potential. I'm sure your experiences in school, as you apply to college and as you choose your major, will help you decide on what you want to do with life and in life. Without consistency, you will never finish. So do what you feel passionate about. Take chances and don't be afraid to fail. Because every failure is one step closer to success. You've got to take risk. I'm telling you why that is so important. You will fail at some point in your life. Accept it. You will lose. You will embarrass yourself. And I'm telling you to embrace it because it is inevitable. I'm telling you to embrace it because it will let you see your way clearly and will pave the way to your biggest breakthrough. Most importantly, in everything you do, take heart and pray. Pray not only for yourself, but also for the people who surround you with love and those who needed love. To batch July 2021 SGVIHS graduates, I salute all of you for not giving up on studying, on learning, and on the challenges of life. Live life, inspire others, and make a difference. Again, congratulations.
Grade 12, Athena. Miss Marifer A. Matibag, Class Advisor.
Dexter B. Amoranto. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Leonardo Amoranto.
Sweetheart John C. Badua. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson V. Badua.
Oliver C. Barceliano. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Donald F. Barceliano.
Alvin M. Bautista. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Antonio S. Bautista.
Norman A. Baimosa. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Norberto M. Baimosa.
Giancarlo T. Bernardino. Parent, Miss Emmeline T. Bernardino.
Angelo Bulusan. Guardians, Miss Mina J. Lamog and Mr. Leocarte J. Lamog.
Marold O. Cabigas. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ronald Cabigas.
Eugenio E. Cases Jr. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Eugenio F. Cases.
Jezreel G. Corpus. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Isagani R. Corpus Sr.
Rogie R. Cristobal. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Rolando C. Cristobal.
Edelchris G. Domingo. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Egnidio C. Domingo.
Maureen J. M. Dumlao. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Mauro S. Dumlao.
Nathaniel T. Frando. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Nathaniel M. Frando.
Rodrigo B. Locredo III. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Crisanto P. Locredo.
Roldan G. Nario. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Rodolfo S. Nario.
Gilbert Nick Dow. Parent, Mr. Alberto V. Gandela.
Patrick Alan S. Nonan. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Pedro S. Nonan Jr.
Jefferson U. Palpalato. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jaime P. Palpalato.
John Linold D. Partido. Parent, Mrs. Leslie M. Partido.
Jerome P. Rodolfo. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Aurelio S. Rodolfo.
Jomar V. Vitales. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. George G. Vitales.
Cristel Joy M. Agustin. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Marino A. Agustin.
Reynalyn S. Amular. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Agapito A. Amular.
Jessa E. Balas. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Leo L. Balas.
Angelina T. Baimosa. With honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Felizardo A. Baimosa.
Fremi Jane T. Baimosa. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Fernando M. Baimosa.
Desiree Grace A. Castillo. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Junior C. Castillo.
Ira P. Cleopas. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Resty L. Cleopas.
Kyla May U. Corpus. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Marcelo G. Corpus.
Princess P. Corpus. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Villamor M. Corpus.
Joanne B. Dococus. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Darwin Dococus.
Christy L. Dalit. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Dominador V. Dalit.
Joelyn O. De Los Santos. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Wilson A. De Los Santos.
Kayla May E. Dingkog. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Quirino A. Dingkog.
April Joy L. Ebrio. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Anastasio P. Ebrio.
Ferndale May E. Eugenio. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ferdinand R. Eugenio.
Ella A. Evangelista. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Michael B. Evangelista.
Sinamar T. Guzman. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Tirso P. Guzman.
Rochelle C. Iglesia. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Danilo G. Iglesia.
Janice T. Ladauna. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Cornelio G. Ladauna.
Christine Joy A. Laureano. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Fidel C. Laureano.
Marilyn A. Minyes. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Marcelino T. Minyes.
Rina May A. Merculio. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Dennis D. Merculio.
Lali B. Pinto. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Danilo R. Pinto.
Hazel Ann F. Reyes. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Rolando R. Reyes.
Princess Jamaica P. Solis. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Randy T. Solis.
Janeline D. Velasco. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Florante A. Velasco.
Noveline C. Villanueva. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Benjamin G. Villanueva.
Grade 12 Aphrodite. Mrs. Presil R. Moralia, Class Advisor.
Freda Luz G. Calderon with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Federico G. Calderon.
Mary Jane D. De Jesus with honors. Mr. and Mrs. Rodolfo T. De Jesus.
Eden Grace S. De Leon with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ronaldo A. De Leon.
Azenet D. Dumrigue with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Edgar B. Dumrigue.
Chris Angeli V. Gabriel with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Crisaldi R. Gabriel.
Lindel M. Merculio with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Noel A. Merculio.
Sa Marie Lucille A. Miguel with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Dexter B. Miguel.
Jeline B. Nario with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Generoso D. Nario.
Bea Bianca T. Obidosa with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Victorio P. Obidosa.
Sheila May A. Picaza with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Edwin T. Picaza.
Micaela A. Santiago with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Manuel A. Santiago.
Epriline L. Abon. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Marcelino R. Abon.
Rialyn C. Abuan. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Hermoso F. Abuan.
Donami E. Andres. Parent, Mrs. Daryl Jean A. Estuesta.
Janibel C. Asuncion. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Belmore M. Asuncion.
Christine May B. Baile. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Christopher D. Baile.
Marilu L. Bulahaw. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Pio A. Bulahaw.
Mia K. Bulan. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Marcelino Bulan.
Karil May C. Quizon. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Leomar S. Quizon.
Mary Rose T. Gabriel. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Eliseo G. Gabriel.
Rodeline D. Gaco. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Rodolfo A. Gaco.
Regine C. Hidalgo. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Roosevelt M. Hidalgo.
Jane V. Iglesia. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Angelito G. Iglesia.
Christy R. Iniego. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Samuel D. Iniego.
Rovilyn A. Liklikan. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Romano R. Liklikan.
Lady Eliza I. Liwanag. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Alan M. Liwanag.
Angeline M. Palisok. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Bartolome E. Palisok Jr.
Romeline E. Rosal. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ramil A. Rosal.
Melody Sandoval. Parent, Mrs. Simplicia M. Colyawit.
Lizelle Joy C. Uminga. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Armando A. Uminga.
Christine A. Vicente. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. John A. Vicente.
Kate Jamel L. de Guzman. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Simeon B. de Guzman.
Rogelio C. de Jesus Jr. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Rogelio S. de Jesus.
Marjune A. Palay. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Noel S. Palay.
Emilio N. Jacinto. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Emilio Jacinto.
Grade 12, Hermes. Mr. Peter Joy R. de la Cruz, Class Advisor.
Christian Mart C. Alarilla. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Oliver B. Alarilla.
Angel Mark H. Anis. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Angelo A. Anis.
Archival C. Anis. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Arnel A. Anis.
Angel Mark D. Ariola. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Angelito O. Ariola.
June V. Balanay. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jojo P. Balanay.
J. Ryan C. Bustamante. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Frankie V. Bustamante.
Patrick Anthony S. Cantor. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Rolando G. Cantor.
Marco Polo E. Carabacan. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Pedro Carabacan.
Ryan Ches B. Conte. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Nelson M. Conte.
Army J. D. De Vera. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Pepito G. De Vera.
Carl Jericho C. Dumo. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Rolando C.
Johnson N. Escobar. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Mario B. Escobar.
Jesus T. Gahelan. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Noel A. Gahelan.
Mark Jolan P. Laggi. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Alan A. Laggi.
Mart Eldridge D. Magno with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Marlon L. Magno.
Bomer G. Marquez. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Benjamin B. Marquez.
Raymar C. Meneses. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ronald E. Meneses.
Kevin Lister G. Nario. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Rodolfo G. Nario.
Relly B. Rempilio. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Domingo N. Rempilio.
Richard B. Rempilio. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Domingo N. Rempilio.
Jiki Boy D. Saltat. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Romy D. Saltat.
Agustin D. Sangaw Jr. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Agustin B. Sangaw.
Bernabe B. Sinaban. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Bernardo M. Sinaban.
Arnel A. Soriano Jr. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Arnel R. Soriano.
Elidio V. Tagame Jr. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Elidio M. Tagame Sr.
Albert V. Valdez. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Armando B. Valdez.
John Alfred T. Yadaw. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Roberto L. Yadaw.
Marites G. Kabawatan. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Rudy G. Kabawatan.
Angel Q. Gumalawi. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Alfredo G. Gumalawi.
Princess Joy T. Yadaw. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Roberto L. Yadaw. Grade 12 ZUS. Miss Jasmine Fair P. Garjola, Class Advisor.
Jericho A. Abaya. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jeremy A. Abaya.
Zaldi G. Alhambra, with high honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ricky C. Alhambra.
Gerald V. Angeles. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Reynaldo D. Angeles.
Brian C. Asuncion. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Dominador A. Asuncion.
Jonathan A. Bakkay. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Marlon S. Bakkay.
John Lloyd F. Bajo. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Chani D. Bajo.
Carlo Balsita. Parent, Miss Mary Jane T. Balsita.
Aaron D. Baltazar. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Benjamin G. Baltazar.
Jerome G. Banzal. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. June C. Banzal.
Mark Russell M. Benitez. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Gigi L. Benitez.
Leo G. Cabanilla. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Moises M. Cabanilla.
Oliver V. Collado. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Gaudencio S. Collado.
Jack Zell D. Corpus. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Hermino M. Corpus.
Joel M. Corpus. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. James T. Corpus.
Mark C. Dakanay. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Fred U. Dakanay.
Hemerson V. Dizon. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Henry B. Dizon.
Wilfredo M. Dumelod Jr. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Alfredo S. Dumelod.
Carl Jenico C. Dumo. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Rolando C. Dumo.
Christian D. Espacio. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Lorenzo A. Espacio.
Daniel B. Helardo. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Danilo T. Helardo.
Romar D. Gumaro. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Robert G. Gumaro.
Richard U. Langawan. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Arnold G. Langawan.
Nick V. Lapurga. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Nestor G. Lapurga.
J. Ryan A. Mapili. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Nolly V. Mapili.
Jordan C. Matias. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. George S. Matias.
Edsel D. Nonan. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Irenio C. Nonan.
John Lloyd D. Nonan. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Rodel L. Nonan.
Erdy M. Renon. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ernesto B. Renon.
Harold P. Sanidad. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Teofilo A. Sanidad.
Albert C. Sherte Jr. Parent, Miss Nora C. Sherte.
Joseph D. Simon. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Lito B. Simon.
Sian Nathaniel R. Simon. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jonathan N. Simon.
Another words of gratitude to be given by Saldi G. Alhambra, a senior high school awardee.
Our guests of honor, parents, teachers, visitors, schoolmates, co-graduates, ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant day to everyone. Today is a memorable day for all of us because we have just ended an episode in our lives, the high school life. Now we are ready to start a new chapter of our journey, the college life. Graduation is one of the most important parts in life because it fills up the empty chapter in our book of life, so it can stay with us forever as a memory and so much more. This day is not only about graduation, it is about recognizing accomplishment from past, the hardship, perseverance, endeavor, patience, tears, and advancing further no matter how much the struggle would be. Every beginning has ending. Journey in high school is the happiest day in life. Experiences makes us inspired to face the challenges in outside world. I started dreaming in an undefined horizon where all I see is darkness, creating confusion in my destination. In such a moment, hope of lights come in my life and ignites my determination to continue what I have started. Albert Einstein once said, "Never give up on what you really want to do. The person with big dreams is more powerful than the one with all the facts." Don't be afraid to dream high. Challenges come around to make us stronger individual. Ika nga nila, walang mahirap sa tao may pangarap. Lastly, I would like to extend my sincerest gratitude to Almighty God, who always there to guide and protect us in all aspects. And also to the people who help us without reservation and expecting nothing in return. Thank you so much. Once again, good morning, happy graduation, and God bless us all.
Leadership is the art of getting someone else to do something you want done because he wants to do it. This was the line uttered by the late American President Dwight Eisenhower, which have had helped us move on. At this point, let us pay attention. In our ears to our leader, no other than our endearing school officer in charge, Madam Gina R. Magbaleta, for her official closing remarks.
Great morning, everyone, especially to the graduates, completers, and parents. We all deserve to celebrate and be proud of ourselves. It is upsetting that we won't have a traditional graduation ceremony, and sadly, we cannot control the circumstances that pandemic brought us today. What you can do now is to choose how to respond to it as you take new steps in life. It can be hard to imagine what life could look like as time progresses. The only certainty we have is that time goes on and the future arrives. You can use the pandemic as an excuse why you can move on in life. Or you can use it as a motivator to find your purpose. Whether you plan to go to college, trade school, military, or straight into the workforce, there is no denying that society will gain something worthwhile. The situation we are living through shows how valuable everyone in a society is. The world is finally realizing the importance of the jobs of the janitors, cashiers, teachers, politicians, first responders, and more. Whatever you plan of doing after graduation, it will impact society. The skills and learnings you gain in San Guillermo Vocational Industrial High School will serve as your weapon and armaments as you journey and struggle in the next steps in your chosen career. Coupled with values and positive attitude, there will be no reasons to achieve your goals and dreams. I invite everyone to look on what you can think and take your time to do so. Although the door for high school has abruptly shut for you, I would like to remind everyone that another has opened and you can do it with what you want. Sa inyo, mga minamahal naming mga magulang, patuloy po nating suportahan at bigyan ng edukasyon ang ating mga anak sa kabila ng mga masalimuot na hamon ng buhay. Pasasaan nga ba't matatapos din ito at ang pangarap nyo sa inyong mga anak ay makakamtan din. Hiling lang namin sa inyo, huwag na huwag kayong bibitaw. Dream big, ika nga. Ang hindi natin napagtagumpayan bilang mga magulang ay maaaring magagawa ng inyong mga anak sa pamamagitan ng tamang pagtataguyod, disiplina at determinasyon. Salamat sa mahabang pasensya at pagmamahal sa inyong mga anak. To you, my dear colleagues, thank you for the remarkable services and unparalleled commitment and dedication you have rendered amid pandemic. Thank you for inspiring and encouraging our learners to pursue studying in the new normal with the new learning modality. To our stakeholders, especially to our municipal mayor, the Honorable Marilu N. Sanchez, who initiated to sponsor 317 units of tablets or e-textbook for the senior high school. To Congressman Ino D. and some alumni who donated printers. To our barangay officials who were our partners in the distribution and retrieval of printed modules. And to all who in one way or another and had contributed their time, money, and efforts in making learning possible, our endless admiration and salute to all of you. This year's theme, kalidad ng edukasyon, lalong patatagin sa gitna ng pandemya, or strengthening the quality of education amid COVID-19 pandemic, is indeed quite challenging that despite bad circumstances and experiences we have gone through, still we find meaning in life that even brought us closer to God, trusting Him of His grace and mercy as we continue to combat the race ahead of us. I therefore encourage you to keep the faith, and whatever life will take, you are resilient and brave. Be inspired and endure the pains. I would like to end my message with this: victor's crown comes only to the ones who endure. On behalf of SGVIHS family, we convey our warmest congratulations and happy graduation. Stay safe and God bless us all.
To start this momentous event, let's hear the message of our dearest Department of Education Secretary, Leonor Mirasol Magtolis Briones.
Good day to each and everyone who is attending virtually present at this time of our graduation ceremonies for our beloved and very precious graduates for the school year which ends at this time. First of all, I'd like to greet the parents and family members without whose sacrifices, whose reminders, and whose participation in the learning process for our graduates have resulted in this culmination program. This year, your role has changed drastically, where we've always believed that the matter of educating our children rests nearly exclusively on our teachers and our staff. This time, you parents, you family members, you who are in the households of our learners have expanded your role and contributed to this wonderful day, wherein finally, our learners are graduating in this culmination exercise. So congratulations, because this year has not been very easy, has not been a picnic for our teachers, for our family members, as well, especially the parents, mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, and all who have contributed to the achievement of our learners at this time. So, maraming salamat at congratulations, parents and family members. Mas malaki ang role ninyo at this time compared to earlier graduation exercises. Secondly, I would also like to greet our teachers, without whose very careful review and careful supervision of the work of our pupils and our learners, this event would not be taking place at all. And so thank you, teachers. Your role has also expanded, in addition to seeing to it that the modules are faithfully followed, the assignments are correctly implemented, and the learners are truly learning and you have had to deal with new ways of assessing the performance also of the learners. So, congratulations, teachers, for enduring, for your patience, for your love for our learners, and your willingness to engage in a way and methods of teaching which are different from those which are used to. Assessment must have been especially difficult for you, especially since you were not able to see most of the time our students in face-to-face meetings, and most of the meetings, of course, were virtual. We'd also like to thank the local government units for their interest, for their cooperation, and for their continuing contributions to the needs of education, even as our children do not go to school. Your donations of material as well as financial resources at this time are most welcome, and your advice has been taken seriously not only by our teachers, by our school officials, but also by our officials in the Department of Education. We continually talk with local government units, especially in times of disaster, in times of great need for classrooms, for space, and for responses to unforeseen emergencies. Thank you, local government units. But of course, most of the congratulatory greetings fall on the deserving graduate. Each and every one of you is truly special. You are different from the other graduates who have passed through the portals of your school. You went to school practically without seeing your teachers, if at all. You went to school with your parents, your mothers, and your fathers hovering over your shoulders and seeing to it that you are able to complete your assignments. You are completing your studies at a time when examinations and assessments are different. You are culminating these long months of hard work at this time, even as you have to do family chores, even as you are distracted, and even as your world has turned upside down, and it seems and it appears as if we don't know what the future holds and what will happen next. But you have persevered, and now you are ready to graduate. And therefore, you deserve each and every bit of congratulations from us in the Department of Education, from your parents and family members, your teachers, from the officials in local government, as well as in the parent teachers associations. You deserve each and every single congratulatory pat on your back, each hug virtually, of course, and each greeting, which I am sure you are also receiving virtually. I don't know if you will remember this event many years from now. I have tried to recall myself who our graduation speaker was when I finished high school and when I finished my college studies. All I remember is that the graduation speaker was someone important. someone who was invited because that someone is supposed to give a message. What was more important to us graduates at that time was the excitement of the celebrations, the happiness and the joy of our parents, the sadness of parting from our classmates and from our teachers, and the enjoyment of all the graduation events that usually take place come commencement day. When I was a college student, we had a series of events which were designed to embed in our minds, which were designed to help us remember and not forget our days in college. We would spend one whole day going around the campus, visiting the classrooms, saying goodbye to our teachers, and sharing memories. We would have bonfires to say goodbye to each other. We had baccalaureate services where we committed ourselves to God and we prayed for guidance when we go out into the world. So many celebrations, and the speaker, of course, is the least important and easily forgotten component of the graduation exercise. Nonetheless, I will exert all efforts to share with you what I see are things or issues which a graduate should remember and recall. I have said that you are very special. You are very different. You are pioneering. There has been no other class like your class. There has been no other graduate like you as a graduating student because you are the very first graduate of the blended learning response to education in the Philippines. And so you ask yourself, what awaits you in the world outside? You can either work because the kind of curriculum you survived and underwent as a student will enable you to go to work if you wish to go to work. Some of you will proceed to further studies, and this would be a wonderful thing because there are many opportunities for further expanding your knowledge, for further answering and looking for explanations of issues, events that make you curious, especially in science, in technology, and also in the arts. So you can work, you can go to further studies, and perhaps some of you will settle down, hopefully not too soon, so you can pursue what you really want to do. So today, this is why we call this exercise a commencement exercise. It's not the end of our studies. It's not the end of all our efforts with blended learning, with modules, with floods, with earthquakes, and of course with COVID. It's a commencement of doors opening to you. More doors will be opened because you are a graduate. You can work, you can proceed for further studies, you can help your parents, and you can perhaps look for opportunities to do what you have always wanted to do, whether at work, whether at advanced studies, whether at learning more in science and technology, in mathematics, and in the arts. All of these opportunities are available to you. More doors are being opened. I hope you will select the door which arouses your curiosity, the door which will help you know more about this world, and the door which will allow you to contribute to the development of our country and contribute whatever we can to solve our problems and our challenges. Congratulations once more to each and every one of you. Congratulations to you, parents and family members. Congratulations to you, teachers. When I was chair of the board of Silliman University, each time we had graduation ceremonies during the baccalaureate and during commencement itself, I would cry. I would cry because you are sending out into the world a new batch of graduates, and we want to be sure that what is awaiting them is appropriate. We want to be sure that they are ready for what awaits them when they select which door to open. And so, we tell you, go out to the world, do whatever you want to do. God be with you, and be assured that all of us love each and every one of you. Congratulations.
We, the SGVIHS family, would like to extend our gratitude to all the people who made this first virtual completion and graduation rites a memorable one. God bless us all. Stay safe.